This is the download from Sounds Profitable, your daily source for the essential news in the business of podcasting. I'm Gavin Gaddis. Here's what you need to know for today, Tuesday, March 4th. First up, news podcast listeners over-index on video podcast consumption. This is Digiday coverage of the news podcast consumer, Sounds Profitable's most recent report built from the podcast landscape. Specifically, the piece focuses on findings regarding video consumption. News podcast audiences are falling more in with podcasts in general, with 50% of them reporting spending more time with podcasts in the past year, compared to 42% for non-news residents. News fans are 6% more likely to consume video podcasts, 87% versus 81% for non-news fans. YouTube is firmly the place news audiences find their news shows, clocking in 65% versus non-news fans 49%. Audiences who regularly consume news content are no stranger to video, are hungry for more podcast content, actively seeking it out. For more coverage of the report as a whole, we're linking to the inside audio marketing coverage of the report in the newsletter version. No Mono unveils the world's easiest way to create immersive audio at South by Southwest 2025. At this year's South by Southwest, No Mono is debuting their Spatial Audio Bundle, a $79 a month subscription that gets users access to a No Mono sound capsule, No Mono spatial audio tools, and their AI-powered cloud platform. Attendees will be able to experience their production workflow solution via live demos, hands-on trials, and discussions of the future of podcasting. The sound capsule will also be the only approved third-party recording solution used on the official podcast stage throughout the event. Sounds Profitable has used No Mono Sound Capsule for remote recordings for going on 2 years, allowing us to bring you the download on the go from hotel rooms, hallways, and the show floor of podcast movement. This new subscription service makes an easy-to-use recording solution even more accessible. Next up, smaller shows win on efficiency, says Podscribe's quarterly dive into podcast ads. This is a look at the Podscribe podcast performance benchmarks for Q4 2024, built from 12 months of data encompassing 64,000 podcast campaigns, over 240 advertisers, and 20 billion impressions. CEO Pete Bersinger highlights the benchmark showing shows with smaller audiences are more efficient at driving visitors per impression. Podcasts with massive audiences have a higher chance of transient listeners, while niche shows are stickier. The trick is finding ways to buy smaller shows at similar scale to buying on a few large podcasts without adding so much overhead the savings are nullified. In general, episodic ad buys delivered 1.52 times higher visitation rates and 1.44 times higher purchasing rates than impression-based ad buys, along with being 10% cheaper. And for our final top story, Joe Rogan's podcast is slipping off the charts. A Newsweek piece looking at Spotify's monthly podcast rankings to chart the performance of the Joe Rogan Experience in recent months. While topping the Spotify charts a fair amount last year, January saw JRE drop to second place behind Sean Ryan, and in February it placed third behind Fall of Civilizations and the Midas Touch podcast. Looking behind the scenes, we can see why. Podscribe data shows last month Rogan's plays and downloads amounted to 51.5 million, a 25% increase from January, while Midas Touch experienced a 109% groundswell to reach 57.5 million. As for the rest of the news, Libsyn has appointed Christopher Avello as their new vice president of marketing, late of 13 years at Audible. Speaking of Audible, the Audible original audio drama Impact Winter is on its way to becoming a TV series, developed by I Am Legend director Francis Lawrence. In an interview with Vulture's Nicholas Qua, Tim Katz, vice president of partnerships, podcasts at YouTube, says YouTube's definition of podcast generally follows what creators label as a podcast, but are also generally considered listenable content that is eyes optional, episodic, and sorted in a playlist. And finally, Spanish podcast platform iVoox has announced integration with Spotify Open Access, allowing their creators to distribute exclusive content into Spotify. Be sure to check out the links to every article mentioned right in your podcast listening app or at soundsprofitable.com, where you can also subscribe to the newsletter version. The download is written and produced by myself, Newton Shadowcotty, Brian Barletta, and Tom Webster. For Sounds Profitable, I'm Gavin Gaddis. Download us again tomorrow.